Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be the final part so far in a series where I've been sort of just recapping my entire PhD experience so far. So video 1 I covered the application process and the first couple of months of my PhD. Part 2 I covered the rest of first year of my PhD, and then the last video I just covered the first part of second year of my PhD, which included a big assessment that I have to do as part of my PhD, where I had to write this almost mini dissertation and present that basically, which as you can see since I've going on to the next part that I did pass that, of course. So all of those videos I'll have the playlist linked down below, and this is going to be wrapping up this series so far by discussing the rest of second year of my PhD, in particular my experience doing an internship as part of my PhD. And then once this sort of series is wrapped up, I know it's not exactly gone down, I think, as well as I would have liked. I do think it's something that might be more beneficial to people in the future who are looking for what the process of a PhD is like from start to finish. I think this playlist will be helpful. But at the moment, I think it's maybe not necessarily something people wanted to see, because if you're not in that specific part of your PhD, it's not really what you want to see. And I know a lot of you prefer watching vlogs where you're sort of seeing the process as it unfolds rather than a specific recap video. But I probably will keep up doing a small recap at the end of each semester of my PhD, just to have something for myself to look back on and to see how far we've come. Upcoming videos we have on this channel, I am doing Vlogmas this year, which will basically mean a different video for the whole of December, and those are mainly going to be around planning, productivity and how to have a productive PhD, and a few other things around sort of income as a PhD student and side hustles, that kind of thing. So do be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you never miss a video. So the semester 2 of second year of my PhD, I will have just finished the transfer assessment, so that was sort of a big weight off my shoulders just at the end of the semester 1 to know that I had passed and gotten into the next stage of the PhD. And stage 2 PhD is really where you've already sort of finished up all your classes and you should be essentially at this stage more focused towards the actual research itself and have a really clear vision for how you want the research to go. In terms of the research, a big research question that we were looking at was how runners become injured, and because of the type of data that we just have raw training data that runners will put, using their Fitbits or their Garmins or whatever into Strava, and we only have that raw information. We don't have any labels from runners to tell us when they've become injured or anything like that. So basically what we were doing was analysing training breaks and doing sort of some exploratory data analysis to see how frequent are training breaks, how do they affect performance and everything like that. And we also then worked on a prediction for whether we could use the current training information to determine whether somebody would have a significant break in training in the future, in the lead up to a marathon. And that work was the main work that we worked on. For that semester. The plan was to put together one conference paper that was more prediction based that we would have submit to the International Conference of Case-Based Reasoning, since the work is using K-nearest neighbours and case-based reasoning, and one journal paper that would be more for a sports science audience to see the analytics of training breaks and that kind of thing. But in this portion of the PhD, I definitely just hit a big wall of demotivation. I found it really difficult because it was a newer project than the project we worked on in first year. It was just really hard to see the end in sight, and I felt like each week I was presenting results, and it just felt like I was getting nowhere, and it was like every week I had to go back and do something differently, or this and that, and it just started to become a bit frustrating. And I think as well, because we were back after Christmas in Ireland, we went into full lockdown again, couldn't do anything, couldn't really see anyone, and it was just really, really hard to stay motivated. The first month, actually, I should mention, I was in Galway in my dad's house for the first month after Christmas, and that time I found it actually okay to work. It was also just a busy time for doing my work with the drama school, because January would be when I take in a lot of one-to-one clients to help them. and so I was quite busy with that. But it was really nice to be down in Galway for that time because it just meant that it was a nice way to start the year off, and Jack, my boyfriend, was there with me. So we just stayed there basically after Christmas because we were technically allowed to, I think from the 26th or something, we weren't allowed to travel anymore, but you were allowed to go home. So we just stayed down for like an extra 4 or 5 weeks and then came back up towards maybe the beginning of February. And Jack is personal trainer, so he was doing personal training with my dad and my stepmom, and I was working away PhD work as well as drama school work. So I did find that time was okay, but once I got home, it was just really hard to see the end in sight for this lockdown and for this work. So the lockdown ended up going on until May. The things that were in place was a 5k limit, so you couldn't go past 5k, 5 kilometers from your house. All the restaurants were closed, pretty much everything was closed. All of the drama classes that we were teaching had to be online and had already been online since September. We had pretty much been in lockdown before Christmas, but we got like 2 or 3 weeks where restaurants were open and where you could have people to your house. But other than that, from about, I think, end of September up until the, I think, May bank holiday was lockdown. So it was just a really, really tough time. Everyone was sort of hoping that December, you know, we'd come out of lockdown and then everything would be fine. And it just was not the case, and it just went on for so long. And first year that we were in working from home, doing things, it was pretty productive. You know, we got out a second research paper, I was taking part in a competition, things were going pretty well. I did that big transfer assessment, you know, all of that kind of stuff happened in lockdown. But the second semester of second year, I just could not bring myself to do it. I found it really hard to get up and do work. I really found it difficult. And it was just not a pleasant experience. I think everybody hits that probably at some point in their PhD, and just to know that it is normal. I think part of the reason as well is because I knew the internship was coming up. So part of me was mentally just being like, oh well, you know, I can't really get this big thing going because we won't have time to get this going in the time that we have leading up to the internship. And I think that was just sort of on my mind as well. But in general, it was just a very difficult one, I have to say. So just to know that if you do end up in a similar situation with that sort of massive hit of demotivation, it is sort of normal. And I can tell you now, I'm on the other side of things. I really am super motivated about my PhD at the moment. Really, really happy that I'm doing my PhD. I'm really happy to be back. And I find that even if there's days where I don't get work done, I find myself wishing that I had more time to work on it. So there will be hopefully a bright side for you. Also, sorry about this lighting. I did not realise I just had this massive shadow on my face for ages. You can see this is my ring light shadow, and you can see my camera literally on my face. So sorry about that. I'm going to move now in a second once I finish this sentence. Yeah, there will be a bright side to it. You will come out the other side of this massive thing of demotivation at some point, I promise. This is what happens when you don't look at yourself too much. I used to be really bad for looking at myself when I was filming. It's just sort of a habit that you get into when you can see, because my screen flips out. And if you're filming on a phone, which is how I started filming originally, you do end up looking at yourself all the time. And it's a bad habit because you can sort of see when people are looking at themselves. You can probably see that I'm doing that right now. Okay. Right, that's a good bit better. We're in a new house. I don't know if I mentioned this. I actually moved house, and you will see that in a vlog. During Vlogmas, you'll see a moving vlog of me moving house. I moved in with my boyfriend. It was pretty kind of sudden. We just had to, when we found a place, just jump on that. Property in Dublin is very fickle, so yeah. Anyways, you'll see that in a vlog. Sorry about that lighting. I don't know how long you had to put up with that, but I'm not going to refilm that. So yeah. What I will say is, like, I don't know, I feel like the supervisors are pretty nice. I don't know if they noticed that I had a big dip in motivation or not, or maybe they just, I always wonder, like, on times where I feel like I don't get as much done and nobody really says anything, I wonder, are they thinking that or not? It's hard to know. To mention that with that research, we did get that paper into ICCBR, but we didn't do the journal paper. So the journal paper is something I'm actually working on now, having come back from my internship, So we only got one of the 2 goals we had for that term done. This is life. This happens. We all do this. Which was disappointing, but look, it gave me a good thing to work on once I came back. Classes. I didn't have to take any more classes this term because I'd finished all of my classes in the previous 2 semesters, but I was TAing for a couple of classes. I was doing a class called Big Data, which was online, and that was using a ticketing system, which means when somebody has a problem, they will sort of write a ticket, they'll include a screenshot of their code, and then we'll reply if it's an easy enough issue to solve, or if it's something that doesn't look like a normal kind of problem to have, we'll go on a call with the person and they could share screen or whatever, and we'd solve that. So that was one of the classes, and then I was also demonstrating for my supervisor's module, which is a data science class with 3rd year data science students, and they basically learn how to do a data analysis using data that they've found. And this is more of a sort of class where you have a couple of groups and you work with them directly and sort of help them build their project. And I really enjoyed doing that class because I felt like it was a really good experience if I was to go into academia and teaching, that you're the kind of work you would do with students when they're doing their final year projects and things like that. I really enjoyed doing that, or like I suppose what it would be like mentoring somebody for their PhD in a long number of years away, but I did really enjoy doing that class, and this year I'm going to be TAing that class, so I'll have even more experience with that, which is good. I can see my camera is about to die, so if there is a big shift in lighting by the time we come back to this thought, apologies. Okay, so it's actually been like 4 days since I filmed the part 1 of this video, because when I was saying my battery was gonna die, turns out I hadn't brought my camera charger to the new house. So yeah, I had to go home and charge it and do all that stuff. So anyways, it's been a couple days. I put back the same jumper on so that you guys would have some semblance of consistency, so you're welcome. But if the lighting is different, if anything else looks different, yeah, that is why. It's because it is different. Let's talk about my internship experience. So for my program, it is required to do an internship as part of my PhD program. We are part of what's known as a Centre for Research Training, which essentially means that we are funded by an external body, not our university specifically. So we are partially funded by our university. We are mainly funded by a research body called Science Foundation Ireland, and we're also funded by industry partners who collaborate with the Centre for Research Training, and they come in and do talks for us. And it's also expected that we do an internship with one of the companies at some point during the 4 years. Typically that would be in the first 2 years of the PhD, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Mainly because for yourself, when you're doing a PhD, when you're in the sort of later stage of it, the sort of 3rd and 4th year, you're really at the point where you're going to be doing a lot more focused work for your thesis, and taking time off to do an internship can sort of take away from that, and it can sort of just, you can lose that track of what you're doing in leading up to the final thesis and the final viva or PhD defense. So doing it in the first 2 years is usually better. Also, you'll take with you a lot of skills that are really useful for your PhD. So if you get those in the earlier stages, obviously that's going to help you more with the later stages. Now, the bad thing for companies in that point of view is that I think typically the benefit for companies taking on interns at a PhD level would be that they can find somebody that they can offer a job to after the internship. Obviously, if you're doing an internship early in your PhD, they can't exactly offer you a real job until closer towards the end of your PhD. So there is some difficulty there for understanding what it's like coming out of the internship. But just briefly, I'm not going to mention the company that I did the internship for, just because I don't think that's really right. I would prefer to just not mention it and just explain my experience more openly. I did the interview in December, and so what I had to do was I had to send off my CV and a little cover letter, and then I had an interview, and the interview essentially involved just talking about the things in my CV, and I was asked a couple of questions about different research projects I was interested in, and if I had read any sort of research papers recently about recommender systems, which is my main research area. It was a nice conversation and there was nothing too technical. I know other people who've done interviews since have had like technical interviews where they've had to do some programming as part of the interview or as one stage of the interview, and I didn't have anything like that. It just depends on the company that you're going for, what kind of interview process that they have. So I found out then in about mid-December that I got the internship and that I was going to be doing it from May to September, and it was from May 24th to September 24th, 2021. So the internship then, you know, in the period leading up, I sort of mentioned that was not the best time in terms of motivation leading up to the internship. So it was definitely a good thing to take that break, because I was definitely at the point in my PhD where I was really struggling to stay motivated and struggling to just do the work. And so the internship came at a good time where I was going to be taking a big 4-month break from the PhD, and I didn't do any PhD work during the time. I did have one sort of presentation that I had to do, and I also had to like do a couple things like get the camera ready, copy of a paper ready, but in general I didn't have any PhD work that I was doing during the time. So it was a complete break from the PhD. So overall, I think in terms of experience, the internship for me was completely online. And I do have a video just sort of going through a day in my life doing the internship. So if you're wanting to see a bit more details, like what a typical day looks like, I will have that video linked down below. But essentially we would have different meetings online. So every morning we would have a daily stand-up with the team that I worked on. And we would just go around the table sort of saying what we worked on and what we worked on the day before and what we were going to work on the next day, which at first was a bit daunting, but I do think it's a good thing to do for sort of accountability. But for me, I did find it quite daunting, and it's something that I prefer to do on more of like a voluntary basis, especially if you have times where you're feeling like things are taking a lot longer than you expected and you have to go in every day and say, oh, this didn't go well again. It can just be not the best. And we also had a second stand-up every day with the team that worked on a specific project, which was part of our team and part of another team. And then we would have like various meetings throughout the day with, you know, one-on-ones, meeting the product team. And I just found it was a very sort of tiring day with all of the meetings, and I would have preferred maybe not having so many, especially not in the early morning stages, because that would usually be the best time for me to get work done. So I found that I wasn't really able to get started with work until after lunch, because there was these meetings in the morning like broken up by a half an hour here and there, not really enough time to get started with proper work. And then that meant I ended up working like later than I'd like to most of the time. And the contract hours were 8:30 to 5. So again, a bit more than I would typically do as part of my normal day, because I really would just try and get most of my work done in about 6 hours a day. And I would usually break it up more. So I'd usually do a couple hours in the morning and take a longer break, and then a couple hours in the afternoon. I just didn't really like the sort of rigidity of the schedule, I guess. And people did say a lot of the time like it was really flexible and this and that, but at the same time, like, you're on a contract for those hours and it just doesn't really feel that flexible. And another thing as well is that like the ideal thing for them would be to return to the office and to be using the office, I think, a bit more. And I just don't really have an intention of working somewhere that I need to be in 5 days a week. So I'm not really sure if it would be the best fit in the long run, mainly for those reasons. But in terms of actually working with the team, everyone was really nice, everyone was really welcoming, and like, because I know a lot about programming, but at the same time I need a lot of help. A lot of what I learned is self-taught, and so my general programming practices wouldn't be very good. And towards the end of the internship I got to do a code review with somebody who was really, really good for like knowing basically the best programming practices, and I found that so helpful. And in the beginning as well, I had a lot of help from other people on the team to get me to the stage of being able to do the work. So I really enjoyed working with the people on the team, and the amount of guidance that I had, I think, was really good. I had typically a meeting once a week with my manager, and then every second week with the VP of the team, and we got to meet up for coffee and things like that in person because we lived relatively close together. So there was, I think, a good amount of guidance and a good amount of interaction, because I still would prefer to work by myself most of the time, and I felt like I was glad I didn't have to necessarily directly work with people too much. But there was definitely, I don't know, I think I would prefer the PhD work that I do. I prefer having much more self-directed work, and I like having coworkers, so I like having other PhD students that work around me, but that I don't necessarily work with, if that makes sense. And it's the same thing, I think, if I was to work in that sort of environment, I would prefer to be doing more of a research role. I would prefer to be doing more of like self-directed projects that's pretty much just me working by myself, and I might obviously report to people and have that kind of relationship where there's people above that I work with. Essentially, because it's a PhD internship, the way the company worked it was that you would come in more as a team member, so a temporary team member, rather than being an intern. You were really expected to do the sort of work that you would be doing if you were starting the work on that team. And I did really like that because it gave me a real feel of what it would be like to work for that team and to see how I would fit into that. So it was essentially just doing bits of work on different projects that were going on at the time. So there was pros and cons to that. I think I also would have liked to have my own project, which I found was difficult because it would have been sort of like a made up project. So I think that probably wouldn't have been the best, but it also could have been good to have something that I was definitely working on. But in general, I found that it was good to really get a sense of what types of projects the team would be working on and how I would fit into those. The main project that I was involved with was at the later stages, and that can be a difficult thing to come into for a software project that, you know, a lot of the decisions have been made already, so there's not really as much of an opportunity to have a say in what's going on and what's being done. So that was one thing that was just a bit of a challenge, and I did end up just doing some like exploratory data analysis work to sort of validate some of the work that was done on that project, and that was what I did for the most part. And I also just ended up doing some just general data analysis to do with the work that had been done on that project. I also got to work on a quantum computing project, and that was something that I really enjoyed and was really surprised by. So at the end of the internship, we had to do this big reflection about what we did and everything like that, and that was one thing that I was just really surprised that I enjoyed, because it is definitely physics based, and I personally really don't like physics. It's just never been something that I clicked with and not something that I'm interested in. I'm one person who has a really poor understanding of how things work in general, like electricity and all of those things. It's just one of those things that I just don't really understand and don't really like care about. That's why I don't understand it. Quantum computing is based on like quantum physics and quantum particles, and I just have no concept of anything like that. I did do a bit of work to try and understand it, but it's just something that I didn't really click with and wasn't really interested by. However, working on the actual project itself was completely maths based, and it was really just trying to figure out a way to formulate a problem in mathematical notation and like write out equations to work on minimizing different things. And that was something I completely understand because I do have a complete maths background. So it's the abstract stuff like that I can do really well. And I really enjoyed doing that. I found it was really good to get back into using my pure maths knowledge a bit more, because I don't feel like I use it as much in my PhD. Computer science and maths like are related, but they're also quite different, so it's hard to know what elements of maths and statistics to really bring to the computer science work, because the way it's done isn't really done that way. So I think that's one thing that I'd like to bring back to the PhD, would be trying to use my maths knowledge a bit more to formulate things in a different way. But I really enjoyed that project. I wish I got to work on it more, and it's something that I think will be a big thing in the future. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time like working on it now, but I do think it could be something I'd be interested in working on in the future, which if you had asked me that before the internship, I would have been like, no way. It definitely was good to get a different experience of something. I think that's the benefit of having the internship. It can be good to do sort of similar work to what you're doing, but it's also really good to try something a bit different. Another element of the internship was that I worked on a hackathon. So the company has various sort of products and APIs, and we were basically instructed to be in teams of interns to utilize a specific API and to build a sort of startup around that. So a startup idea based around using that API. I can't really go into it in detail, but we worked on that for a couple of days and put together a presentation and sort of a video about how the product would work, and that was really fun. I do really enjoy doing that kind of thing, and it was a small group, so it worked really well, and we ended up coming second and we got like €100 voucher, so that was great. Another thing that I really took away from the internship was we got a lot of practical experience with working with really big data sets. The one thing that I find from like doing computer science classes is like you can get good at something in the little bubble of the class with your toy data sets, and you know, you think you know how to do something, but then when you're in the real world working on real data sets, it's very different, and you can often get a bit confused how to really start implementing these things. So it was really a great experience. For the main project that I was working on, I got to learn a language called Spark, which again, I learned about this language already in a class. I had used it before, but actually implementing it practically is very different. It was definitely a full like learning experience to really figure out how to use it. And that's something that now I'm taking with me into the PhD, because I now know how to use it and I know how to work with much larger data sets. So you'll see coming up in a future video that I'm now working with a much bigger data set than I had been before, and I'm able to do that I think with a bit more confidence because of learning Spark during the PhD internship. And it's something that I don't think I would have put as much time into if it was just part of my PhD work. In terms of the general work setting, I probably don't want to work in that kind of environment unless it was a very specific research role, and at that point it's sort of like, if I was to do that sort of research role, then why not just do it in academia? That's sort of where I'm at right now. So I think I definitely would return to that company if I planned to go into a job outside of academia. But I think at the moment I would say ideally I'd like to stay in academics and just keep going. I'm glad that I got that company because it was quite a big company, and I really wanted to get the feel of what it would be like to work in sort of a bigger tech company. What I will say is, coming out of the internship, I feel so much more positive towards my PhD. This past week has been the first time in the 2 months, more than 2 months that I've been back, where I've been like a bit off with the PhD work. And that's a multitude of things: feeling a bit sick, having to cancel travel plans, just a few different things. We're probably heading back into another lockdown, and yeah, like it's just feeling a bit crap. But at the same time, I know in general I'm pretty positive, pretty there for the PhD, and I'm just really looking forward to doing a really good job on my thesis. I just really am pumped for it. The final thing that I did in second year was I began working on the diversity initiative in my school, so in the School of Computer Science in my university. And so I'm the postgrad rep, or one of the postgrad reps, on the committee that is focused on equality, diversity and inclusion. And it's a really, really big problem in computer science. So in terms of numbers, is around, I think in the US and in Ireland at least as well, is around 18 or 19% of undergraduates who get their degree in computer science being female. And, you know, obviously then there'll be a similar issue for, you know, non-binary students not being represented, LGBTQ, people of colour, and then the intersectional issue there of when somebody is multiple of those, so being a Black woman in computer science is very rare, and especially like it's hard not to miss it, I think. Maybe a lot of people do, but you know, and you're looking around and you just don't see people of colour in the programs, and it's really quite bad. It's slightly better in the postgrad. So my program, being funded by Science Foundation Ireland, requires that we have equal numbers of males and females, and I think it's relatively diverse in terms of, at least compared to the undergraduate makeup. So I'm part of the committee to try and help that. But over the summer what we were doing was basically putting together a report of the current state of equality, diversity, inclusion in the School of Computer Science, and an action plan for the next couple of years of what we're going to do to try and help that. That's just been the last thing really that's been part of second year. And then that pretty much wraps up this video. I hope that you enjoyed this series so far. I don't think it did super well. I don't think, because it's like the kind of thing where you're only going to really be wanting to know the information that's going on relative to right now, or maybe for the next stage up. But I'm hoping that this series will be something that I can look back on and just have a good recap, a good summary of my 4 years, and that will be helpful for people who are wondering what the different stages of the PhD might be like. So I really hope that you enjoyed this. The next one will be coming sort of, I suppose, after this semester finishes, probably sometime in January. sort of a recap of the first half of my third year perhaps. We have very soon coming up Vlogmas, which will be a different video every day from the 1st of December to the 25th of December, and it's going to be mainly focused on productivity and planning in a PhD, and I really hope that you will love it. So thanks again for watching, thanks to all of my wonderful members, and I will see you all in the next video.